And welcome to the hearing of December 1st, 2010 of the County of Santa Barbara Planning Commission. Would you please all rise for the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And good morning, Mr. Villalobos. If you do our TV coverage announcement and roll call, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSB-TV, Channel 20, at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcasts of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSB-TV, Channel 20. And now for the roll call. Commissioner Brooks.
Here.
Commissioner Cooney.
Here.
Commissioner Valencia.
Here.
Commissioner Blau.
Here.
And Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And good morning, Ms. Black. The agenda status report, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. This morning you have two items on your agenda, the workshop on proposed amendments to the Land Use Development Code and a briefing from the Housing and Community Development Director. And then we have our Planning Commission lunch at 11:30 at Opal.
Good. And
We're ready to proceed with all those items.
good. And then the projection report, please.
So, Madam Chair and members of the Commission, we have one hearing left for this calendar year. It's next week, December 8th, in Santa Maria, and there are probably about a half a day's worth of work on that agenda. The Montecito Planning Commission will be meeting its final time on December 15th, and then we will reconvene with your commission. Right now, we have one item scheduled for January 5th. And one item scheduled for January 12th. We may look into trying to combine those two items into one hearing to avoid having such short hearings. We have nothing projected for your commission on January 19th as it stands. February 2nd, we are planning to do another workshop with the Planning Commission on the telecommunications ordinance amendments that the board directed our department to work on, and we'd like the input from your commission and the Montecito Planning Commission before finally drafting those ordinance amendments and bringing those forward. And then on February 9th, we also have a project up in the North County in the Orchid area. So we'll see how those agendas fill out, and I'll monitor them and try and move them around as much as I can. As to your agendas, you did receive in your packet today the proposed hearing schedule for next calendar year. It shows your Planning Commission as well as a number of other hearing bodies included, and it's the normal schedule for your commission where we're scheduled to meet the first 3 Wednesdays of the month, and then the 4th Wednesday of the month is reserved for the Montecito Planning Commission. And I will try my best to consolidate hearings where we can and to try and keep those hearings to the first 2 meetings of the month where volume allows. And that's all I had to say about the projection report.
All right. Thank you. Commissioner Cooney.
Madam Chair, Ms. Black, have we begun to plan for any kind of retreat during the first quarter?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Cooney, I pretty much knew somebody was going to ask about that, and Rachel and I have only had very brief discussions about it. We haven't even tried to pick a date or a time frame, so we'll talk about that, and maybe we'll be prepared to address that next week at your hearing.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Ms. Black, I just want to speak a little bit about the projected agenda. Next week will be if we're going to cancel any meetings, next week will be our last time to do that. So I presume that you'll be adding or rearranging or changing so that we can do that by the 8th.
Correct.
And I was just thinking that if we had a January 19th meeting, we could put both items on that here in Santa Barbara instead of splitting, but I don't know how the rest of the commission feels about that, but I'm sure you'll look at that and come up with some suggestions for next time we meet.
Madam Chair, is there a preference of the commission as to which of those hearings you would want to cancel?
Well, I think the 5th. I think we talked about that before. The 5th.
Well, the fact that you're not going to be here for the last part of December, it seems to me the January 5th meeting is probably unlikely. If we go to the 19th, there's an opportunity for to add additional things in the first week or so of the year. So I would just as soon we go ahead and cancel the January 5th meeting right now, because there's no real chance for the staff to prepare anything for it as it stands.
Well, Madam Chair, if I could suggest, why don't we hold off on canceling the meetings until next Wednesday, and I'll see what I can do to consolidate both of those items onto January 19th.
Okay.
The Vincent Winery is a 3rd District item, so perhaps having it heard down here wouldn't be a
Okay.
terrible thing.
Okay. Commissioner Cooney, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment about scheduling. I just have seen when we have extended breaks between meetings, we lose some of the flow of matters that we've discussed in the past. And while the 12th is not unreasonable, it would be a full month from our meeting next week. When we get to the 19th, it begins to be what gets lost in the shuffle, I think, are the routine things that are important to us and to the public, the general business of the Planning Commission, the opportunity of people to make public comment, to bring matters to our attention. Specific projects can be rearranged, but 5 weeks I would lean against. I'd rather have us meet on the 12th if we have a choice.
Commissioner Valencia.
Madam Chair, maybe at this time I could bring this up. There are quite a few projects that have been approved in various areas but have not been started. Is there any chance in our January meeting that we could get a small update, like Quayside 1, Quayside 3, and some of these other Orchid Village of where they're at and so on? Just a small abstract. Thank you.
Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, even though we're not seeing many projects come before us these days, either track maps or development permits, in the past we had talked about spending some time going through the standard conditions and how those are being rewritten, and this might be a good opportunity the first part of next year where we actually could spend a day going through those and revising them so that we don't have some of the long discussions we've had in the recent past on certain projects. I know you had some computer issues that you were working with. I don't know if those were resolved yet or not, but I would love to see us, while we're not dealing with any specific projects, take some time and see if we can't stream like that. It just makes life a lot easier for people.
Great. Okay. So, Ms. Black, you have your work cut out for you. Anything else on the projected agenda? If not, we'll move on to public comment period, and this is the time to allow the public to speak on any item not on today's agenda. And we have one speaker slip, and that is Mr. Thorndike, and we welcome you, Mr. Thorndike.
Thank you, Chair Brown and Commissioner Cooney and the rest of you. I'm John Thorndike from 1300 Toro Canyon Road or 1073 Toro Canyon Road, or both. And there is some confusion on that. The county thinks that they bought the parcel, is what I was given to understand. Yet I assure you they have only bought the center of the parcel. And I'm going to give the county 90 days to give me $100,000 that I paid for going to court and winning a case 176081, plus $180,000 promptly, or I'm going to take the matter to the federal court where Judge Percy Anderson in Los Angeles told me if the county does not, I had to give the county and the state a chance to resolve the matter. They haven't done it to my satisfaction. And as the state Court of Appeals, a judge said with his hand like this, got up with 4 judges there and said to the Attorney General, if you don't satisfy Mr. Thorndike, the court will. End of quote. Now, that was the state court. I went on without attorneys to the court of, from the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court, and the only justification that they had, the only defense they had was statutes of limitations. I can shred that. I can shred it. Absolutely ridiculous. The people who are defending are the ones that created the statute in the first place as they went along to suit the occasion. In the case of 7 vehicles that I lost, in the case, that was the first one. And then in this court, water is still flowing as I'm talking from my well to the county. Now, I'm not fooling around with the county. I'm not rushing anything, but I will continue in the federal court if needed. I think you people have a bargain if you settle with me now. And I think you should tell that to the Board of Supervisors, who encouraged the lies I got from the county in writing. Gobs of them. They're all disproven. And that's why they don't address the merits. Now, the county gave me notice recently. They came in the mail 2 months late that if I don't remove my personal property in 2 weeks, that means I got the letter 6 weeks too late to do this, or the county would confiscate my personal property. No, that's children playing with me. My answer to all concerned is that this plaintiff has broken his back to administratively accommodate the federal, state, and local governments for over a year in this instance, since California Supreme Court green light that I can take the matter to the federal court. And Judge Percy Anderson, in writing, told me that he'll take that and settle it if the county doesn't and the state doesn't. So let's get with it and look at it. It's very simple. I own a half-mile property. The county bought a quarter-mile property, and they have left me dangling with 2 tiny parcels, one between the county and the Los Padres National Forest, and the other between 72 feet beyond to the west of the Torrey Canyon Road on to where they bought. So I got one little one down below, one above. I'm tired of this. I don't want to play with the county. I'm an old man. I am 83 years old. This is my 83rd year. I don't want any more of that. So please get the message to the board. They're the ones that are accountable.
Thank you, Mr. Thorndike.
You're welcome.
Okay. I see I have 2 other speaker slips, and they've marked for agenda item 5, but we don't have any agenda item 5. Did you want to make comments at public comment? This is Michael Bailey and Mr. Reitz. Okay, so why don't you go ahead, Mr. Bailey?
My name is Michael Bailey, and I live at 1116 Palomino Road. And this is regarding, I thought it was agenda item 5. It has to do with the automobile limits and materials limits here. So just a brief comment
Oh,
here.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
So, Madam Chair, I believe the speaker intends to speak to item number 1, which is one of the components of the ordinance amendment package that we were going to discuss today.
Oh, is
so
it?
Perhaps you'd like
Oh, I'm sorry.
just to wait a few moments. It won't
Okay.
be very long.
I'm sorry. I misunderstood that. I didn't realize that was part of it. So we'll call you back up
Okay,
when
thank
we
you.
do agenda item 1. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Now we move on to Planning Commissioner's informational reports. Commissioner Cooney?
Madam Chair, I would just briefly report that I attended a very interesting public meeting last night, which the primary subject of which is a project that has been before the Board of Architectural Review. It's a single-family residence, a lot split, a variance request within the Summerlin planning area. And the meeting, the formal meeting was a combined meeting of the Summerlin Planning Advisory Committee and also the Summerlin Citizens Association, which is not a governmental organization, but a longstanding organization of interested Summerlin citizens, and the Summerlin BAR. The meeting really spent a lot of time just trying to figure out how it was going to go forward, given the fact that there was a Brown Act concern with respect to the Summerlin PAC, but not with respect to the other agencies, and yet members of the PAC were concerned that they wanted to provide input and comment on the project itself. But those issues notwithstanding, there was a presentation by the applicant. It's called CalProp. At some point, it's proposed it will be coming to the Planning Commission. It was interesting to get a preview, but even more interesting to participate for a few hours in the government process in the tiny community of Summerlin.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Valencia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, this last week in my mail pouch from the county, I received a letter from the project on Roblar, the winery on Roblar. It was a letter detailing their problems and some pictures, and I'm concerned that if I received this information, my fellow commissioners should have received it all also, and I don't know if you have or not. It was addressed to me, and I know we're supposed to share this kind of information. Did anybody else receive this information?
Commissioner Valencia, I think Mr. Villalobos believes everybody did, but he'll check and make sure.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cooney.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. Then we'll move on to our next item, which is minutes of November 10th. So do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Also move.
Okay, and second?
I'll second, Madam Chair. I do have a couple of comments regarding the minutes.
Okay, good.
First and most importantly, item C4, one of the consent items on Rancho San Fernando Rey. I did, as you recall, recuse myself from hearing that item, yet the vote reflects a 5-0 vote. It should be a 4-0-1 vote. I don't know whether council feels there needs to be any mention of the recusal, but I certainly
Yeah.
want the vote to
Yeah.
be reflected
Right.
accurately. And the others is just a couple of words I want to insert for English purposes, and I'll take up with Mr. Villalobos.
Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, on page 10, I had a question regarding D1. This was a revision we had come up with. It was the noise levels for the small wind energy systems. And at the end of line 3, it says, or 50 decibels, whichever is less. And I vaguely recall, I put in my column, it was 45 decibels that we discussed. So just
Commissioner Cooney.
I think it was our expert in Santa Barbara that had the 50 decibels, and we agreed with it, to tell you the truth. I think 50 is correct.
Ms. Black.
Madam Chair, I wish I could be more helpful on this one. I was not at the hearing, nor did I watch it. I did speak with Mr. Langle this morning. He remembered 50. That was
right.
his note. County Counsel's indicating that she recalls it was 50 as well.
I'm quite
So-
certain it was 50,
Was
to
it?
tell you the truth.
Interesting, because I had
I think-
remembered it as 45.
And I believe what Mr. Langle told me was 45 and 50 were both discussed, but that the commission
Okay.
ended on 50.
I wonder if Mr. Lingle could just go back through the record.
Sure.
To make sure.
Yes, of course.
That that's what it was. If that's, okay. All right.
I'm positive it was our expert in Santa Barbara
Okay.
on the microphone that said 50, so.
Okay, well, that's fine.
Madam Chair, would you like to hold these minutes for
You know, I think
a
I
week?
would. Maybe he could do that, and we'll just look at it at the end. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Valencia.
Madam Chair, if I can share some light on that, I think I recall that the instrument recorded 43 dB, and they said, all right, let's go to 50 then. And that was what was
All right.
testified to.
Well, we'll just hold these and then we'll be certain. Thank you. Okay, any other changes, corrections, comments? Okay. Seeing none, all those we can't do it, we're going to postpone it till the end, sorry. Okay. Then we'll move on to our Director's Report and Board of Supervisors hearing summary. Ms. Black, will you be giving that today?
Madam Chair, I will.
Okay, good.
Mr. Russell is in another meeting, and since very few items have happened at the board, he thought he should probably attend to this other matter. First of all, I have a couple of announcements to make. We have most recently hired Jeff Hunt as our long-range planning director, and Jeff is here, and
Welcome.
I'm sure would be happy to say a few words to the commission about his experience and background. And somebody who isn't here, but I think all of you know, is Alice McCurdy, and she has accepted the position of Development Review Deputy in the South County. So Alice will be serving in that capacity, actually starting yesterday. So very happy to almost have a full management team. While we were making those two hires, unfortunately, our building and safety manager resigned, so we are looking to see about filling that position as well. But I'd like to provide Jeff an opportunity to introduce himself to the commission and
Great, thank you. Good morning and
for
welcome.
you to
Mr.
ask
Hunt.
questions if you'd like.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I'll give you a little background just so you can understand where I'm coming from. I've got an undergraduate degree with a double major in environmental science and economics. I was interested in my youth to try and find both sides of the issue and listen to both sides, find a balance. Then I went on to get a master's in public administration. My work experience started way back in the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area, and from there I worked for Hood River County, both as a long-range planner and a current planner. So I do have experience with the planning commissions and development review. From there I went to Vail, Colorado, where they did a lot of design review. Very interesting. They're very concerned about the appearance of their community. And from there I took a job with the town of Breckenridge, another ski town. And from there I made quite a change, ended up in the county of Maui. And from there I'm here. So one thing I've noticed throughout my career is there's a lot of common elements with different communities. Transportation, how do we accommodate growth and still retain community character? At the same time, I've appreciated that every community is unique, and we all, as planners, have to respect that uniqueness and recognize that. And so I hope with my experience and background that I can work with this commission and the other boards in helping to improve our community. So thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to working with you as well. Great. Ms. Black.
Madam Chair, so on to more mundane matters. Last month, I had the opportunity to attend the Coastal Commission meeting on the Land Use Development Code, as did Supervisor Farr. Jeff Hunt attended as well to get a feel for that particular hearing body and process. Dr. Russell was there and testified, and obviously Mr. Lingle was there to answer any technical questions that might have arisen. The long and the short of it is the board sent a letter, a fairly clear letter, indicating their intent to request some suggested modification changes. And they're pretty much the same suggested modifications we've been discussing all along. The requirements for permits for expansion and intensification of agriculture and grazing, the permit requirements for houses on agricultural lands, and the requirement that if a house is above 5,000 square feet, it would require an appealable coastal development permit. Limitations on the keeping of horses in both agricultural and residentially zoned properties, the limits on repairing private bluff stairways and the prohibition on new private bluff stairways, and then requirements for an appealable CDP for lot mergers and lot line adjustments. So those are sort of the issues we took to the Coastal Commission, and we said, except for these particular issues, we are fine with your suggested modifications, but these pose some fairly substantial problems with the County of Santa Barbara. The commission received a lot of testimony and spent some, I would say, considerable time for the Coastal Commission debating the issues, discussing the issues. They actually at one point called one of our agriculturalists up to ask questions about how these particular suggested modifications would affect a real-time farmer. And in the end, they really made very few changes to their staff's recommendation. They did increase, I don't know if the commission remembers, but what the suggested modification provided for with respect to expansion of agricultural operations is exemptions if an agricultural expansion met certain criteria. And the criteria included things like setbacks from creeks, setbacks from environmentally sensitive habitat areas, and a limitation on the amount of grading. And that limitation was set at 50 cubic yards by the staff, and the commission increased that to 100. And then right prior to the hearing, the Coastal Commission staff made some clarifications about the keeping of horses. If you saw the board's hearing back in November, there were a lot of questions about keeping of horses, and what if a horse has a foal, when does it need a permit, and can you replace horses, et cetera. And so they did clarify some of those issues as well. But by and large, the remaining suggested modifications stayed in place and were adopted by the Coastal Commission. So we are scheduled to return to the board for a discussion on December 14th. I don't know that the board will be in a position to take final action or give us final direction on where they want to go. Essentially, ultimately, the board really only has two options. They can either accept the suggested modifications in their entirety as they were approved by the Coastal Commission, or they can reject or allow those suggested modifications to lapse. They have 6 months in which to do that. If they don't accept the suggested modifications, then we continue to use Article 2 as our implementing ordinance for the coastal zoning ordinance. So, there's certainly a significant policy choices involved, and the board's going to be confronted with that soon.
Commissioner
Thank
Valencia.
you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And what is the next appeal level to the Board of Supervisors should they choose not to enforce the?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Valencia, there isn't really an appeal. I mean, the county ultimately has a choice to make as to whether we want the land use development code in place, and if we do, then that comes with all of those suggested modifications. And if those suggested modifications are unacceptable and don't outweigh the benefits of adopting the land use development code, then we would simply continue to use Article 2 as our zoning ordinance. So there's no real appeal. I mean, it's really a choice for the county to make.
So that the county can choose not to.
Yes.
Right, just leave everything as it is.
So what does that do to the authority of the Coastal Commission?
Well, Madam Chair and Commissioner Valencia, the commission still has authority in their in permits that are currently appealable to them. So there are still a number of permits that are appealable to the Coastal Commission, and they also have authority over any changes that we might want to make subsequently to Article 2, if we were to stay with Article 2, because as your commission knows, we've done a lot of work on ordinance amendments since we submitted the Land Use Development Code to the Coastal Commission, and so we would anticipate that if the Land Use Development Code were rejected, that we would be reprocessing some of these ordinance amendments into Article 2 language, and the commission would have authority on whether or not those
It
changes
seems-
are appropriate.
Pardon me. It seems like we're entering a should and shall world and bickering with the commission and the planning commission. I was hoping that wouldn't happen, because I can see the county not wanting to implement some of those things because they were quite restrictive. So I guess we'll see that, and our county councils will be very busy in the future.
Commissioner Cooney?
You can be sure.
My question, Ms. Black, relates to the Board of Supervisors' discretion. You indicated one of the choices was, well, regardless of their choice, they had 6 months to make it. So let's assume they decide in December, next week or whenever it is, that they're just not going to decide for now. They're going to wait longer. We will continue to process applications according to the currently in place Land Use and Development Code.
No.
Oh, I'm getting great, Mr. We're getting two different shakes of the head, so.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Cooney, the Land Use Development Code is not in place in the coastal zone. It's not being implemented in the coastal zone. It cannot be implemented until it's certified by the Coastal Commission and accepted by the county. So we have been processing coastal permits under Article 2 this entire time, since the Land Use Development Code was submitted to the Coastal Commission.
What about the Isla Vista Master Plan?
The same is true of the Isla Vista Master
Okay.
Plan. We've been processing permits under Article 2. We've been trying to implement the principles of the Isla Vista Master Plan at the same time, but we've been processing permits under Article 2.
Okay.
And that is one of the pieces of work that we would certainly need to reformat into Article 2 language were the county to reject the Land Use Development Code with its suggested modifications.
But didn't you indicate that even if the county rejects the Coastal Commission modifications, that the Coastal Commission would have a second bite at the apple should we amend Article 2 in some way that that fell within their jurisdiction?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Cooney, it's certainly correct that every time we amend Article 2, that amendment process includes the Coastal Commission. So they have to certify our amendments before they come in into effect. I don't believe that the Coastal Commission would take the opportunity on every single amendment to try and completely reformat the code. I think they would work within the constraints of Article 2. Clearly, we know where they want to go, and so to the extent they can make changes within a specific amendment that they can tie into their ultimate goals, I think they will do that. So I think we will see a piecemeal approach were we to reject the Land Use Development Code in trying to get where they ultimately want to go. And I think pretty much everybody knows that. And in fact, in the Gaviota Community Plan process, I think that's the Gaviota PAC understands that and knows they're going to have to address this issue in the context of Gaviota, but they want to be able to do it with their full process behind them, so they can present the best case that they can for the community's desires. So I think it's going to be an interesting struggle if that's where we go.
Commissioner Valencia?
One final question, Madam Chair. Is the Coastal Land Use Plan of 1980 and the Article 2 Coastal Plan the same thing? Are they similar?
I'm not sure if I'm going to be answering your question, but
Just the light.
I'll give it a try, Madam Chair and Commissioner Valencia. So we have a certified local coastal program that includes the Coastal Land Use Plan, which is like our general plan in the coastal zone, and Article 2, which is the implementing ordinance. So both of those make up that
Okay.
local coastal program.
So, all right, thank you.
And we've amended both over the years.
Ms. Black, reintegration of material in Ivy Master Plan, Goleta Valley Design Guidelines, and there's some other couple things out there pending, I guess. What kind of job is that? It's considerable, is it not, to do that?
Madam Chair and Commissioners, all of this is considerable.
I-
It's considerable to incorporate all of the suggested modifications. It's a very considerable work effort to pull the coastal portion of the Land Use Development Code out of the Land Use Development Code. It's substantial work to reprocess those amendments that we've already, ordinance amendments that we've already put forward in Land Use Development Code language. So there's nothing easy about this. Some have asked, well, which one's harder? It's all going to take some time.
And
to sort
then
through.
once, let's say that that's the route that's chosen, that you do that, the Coastal Commission gets a bite at that apple too. No, they do not.
Yep,
Mr.
which
Langles.
apple?
If you reinsert everything back into Article 2.
Well, Madam Chair, just to be, you mean reinsert like
Well, IV master plan.
the coastal
Reprocess, I guess that's
So
the word you
the-
use.
Madam Chair, the Coastal Commission has not yet acted on the Isla Vista Master Plan or a number of other amendments because they can't really change a document that's not yet certified. So we changed everything into Land Use Development Code language, and then we continued on our merry way of processing things in that language and submitted them to the Coastal Commission, and they've called packages that we've submitted complete but for adoption of the Land Use Development Code. So they haven't really even started processing
Yeah, okay.
those items except to get them to the completeness phase. Does that answer your question?
Well, sort of. It's just, it's a long and tortuous road that's in
It-
front of
there's-
that, whichever.
There's a lot of untwining to do whichever
Yes.
way we go.
Yeah, good. All right, Mr. Langle, do you have any comment on, you're at the heartbeat of this process in terms of manipulating all this information and changing?
Madam Chair, just to reinforce what Ms. Black said, that either route that the board chooses to go is going to involve a fairly substantial work effort.
Right.
Be that incorporating those changes into the development code that were certified by the Coastal Commission, which is going to require essentially readoption of both Montecito and County Land Use Development Codes, because the Coastal Commission modifications actually affected the framework of the code as it affects the inland portion also. So to fully implement their changes, we're going to have to bring the whole codes back through your commission, the Montecito Planning Commission, back to the board for adoption. So, and then to subtract the coastal zone sections from the development code, it's going to lead, I don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet, but I'm sort of thinking that it's going to lead to some either interesting gaps in the development code that we may want to fix by amending the whole thing again, but we'll see when we start pulling out those sections.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. And Ms. Black, returning to you.
Madam Chair, I think County Council is advising that since we've had such a substantial number of questions about this item, that you may want to ask if there's anybody here who wanted to make
okay.
public comment on it, and then I'll
Certainly.
finish up my director's report.
Okay, certainly, I'd be happy to. Is there anybody who would like to make a public comment on this issue, on the Coastal Commission's action on the county's land use and development code? No. Seeing no one rise, then, thank you.
Okay.
Then-
Well, there will certainly be more to come on this particular issue as we continue to work through it with
Let
the
me
Board of
just hear, Ms.
Supervisors.
Brooks, if was,
I
you had
was
a comment or
just,
question?
before us, we did have some input from several organizations, and so this is the only time that we're going to discuss
I think
it,
those were
would
the
just
letters
say.
to the Coastal
Yes,
Commission.
they're copies of that,
Right.
just to give us some
Right.
background on their position. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So I'm going to move on.
Okay, good. All right.
If you're ready. Okay. I just wanted to alert the board or the commission to some items that are coming up to the Board of Supervisors this month. We have quite a few items on the December 7th and 14th agendas. First of all, not directly our item, but related to the Housing and Community Development Department's work. They are bringing forward the rights and duties of landlords and tenants, that's Chapter 44, to the commission, or to the Board of Supervisors on December 7th. And the impact on planning and development is relatively small. I mean, it requires some procedural things that we already do with respect to notifying tenants of their rights when buildings need to be vacated due to public health or safety issue. There's one additional item included in this ordinance that wasn't in before with respect to our department, and that is fast-track processing in certain situations to encourage landlords to provide their tenants with their security deposits back quickly, to help in relocation, et cetera. So that's on December 7th. We also have the building code changes on December 7th as well. Those are essentially to adopt the uniform codes promulgated by the state. We have the medical marijuana urgency ordinance extension on December 7th. And we have the board's review of the HLAC decision to designate the Car Rich Cabana, that's off of Hope Ranch, on December 7th as well. And then on December 14th, we will be hearing the ordinance amendments for wind energy that your commission heard last month, as well as providing the board with an update on the land use development code and getting some initial indications from the board as to where they want to go, if we even get that far.
Okay.
So those items will be before the board, before they take their winter break. And then in January, we have a number of items coming up as well. We have an onshore oil facility report dealing with high-risk offender criteria. We have a process improvement summary, which the Oversight Committee had requested that we provide when we had a new CEO and a new 5th District board member in place. And we will be coming forward with the Los Alamos Community Plan as well.
Okay. Busy times.
Busy times.
Yeah, good.
That's all I.
And that's it.
That's all I had to report.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Van Mullen? Yeah. Okay. Okay, any questions, comments by commissioners on that? None? All right. Then we're going to move on to our standard agenda, and do we need a couple minutes to set up for this, Mr. Lengel? Or do we just want to move right into it? Looks like he's ready. So, Mr. Villalobos, if you'd read that into the record, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Planning and Development Department will provide information to the County Planning Commission regarding proposed amendments to the County Land Use and Development Code that are currently being developed by Planning and Development Department staff. These amendments address the outdoor storage of automobiles and materials on residential lots, procedures for processing conditional certificates of compliance, phasing procedures for conditional use permits and development plans, procedures for approving modifications to zoning standards not associated with the conditional use permits and development plans, creating a process to allow the director to make similar use determinations for existing shopping centers, and revising the standards relating to the temporary use of property.
Great. Mr. Lengel?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Planning Commission, members of the Planning Commission. Just by way of a brief summary, we have been preparing a series of ordinance amendments to bring to your commission hopefully in early 2011. We had hoped that we would actually get to your commission and to the board by the end of this year, but other projects, including but not limited to the Coastal Commission Certification of Land Use Development Code, have certainly taken a lot more time than we originally expected. The series of ordinance amendments is sort of reinvigorating a process that we've had in the past, where we would bring packages of amendments to your commission for consideration, then onto the board, part of our ongoing process improvement to make sure that our development code and zoning ordinances are kept up to date. And some of these issues sprung from that effort, and also from other issues that have developed throughout the county, including things that we identified through the adoption of the land use and development codes that needed to be fixed, but were of a more substantive nature than we wanted to take on during the adoption itself. Also, issues that the Process Improvement Oversight Committee had reviewed and I'd recommended that we proceed with. Certain issues that were identified through zoning enforcement actions, and then most recently, an issue regarding similar use determinations in the shopping center zone, that your commission expressed a desire that these be downshifted to a different level of decision-making authority. So the purpose of this session is to acquaint your commission with the proposed ordinance amendments that we're currently working on, and to receive comments and feedback from your commission regarding these amendments. The first item that we'll just be discussing is an amendment addressing automobile and material storage on residential lots. And within residential zones, the proposal would regulate the number of automobiles that can be stored outside, as well as the amount of area on a particular lot that can be devoted to exterior storage of materials, be they building materials, somebody's collection of whatever, scrap wood, firewood, whatever, just to control what is kept outside on a residentially zoned piece of property. The development standards that we're proposing as part of this effort would require certain fencing and screening of these storage of either automobiles or materials to ensure compatibility with the surrounding neighbors, as well as providing a methodology by which both the number of automobiles and the amount of material storage may be increased based on site-specific considerations through a minor conditional use permit process. The ordinance provides that essentially there's a lot of situations where if the ordinance changes and it would affect a piece of property and the existing use of that property, that existing use becomes a non-conforming use and is allowed to remain indefinitely. However, this particular amendment would not include that provision and would provide instead that there would be a 6-month grace period essentially from the effective date of the ordinance for any property owners that do not comply currently or do not comply with the terms of the ordinance to either bring their property into compliance or seek the necessary permits in order to bring their property into compliance. And that once this grace period passes and the property is still not in compliance, then that would be deemed a violation of the development code, and zoning violation efforts would pursue at that time. Any questions on this particular amendment?
Commissioner Cooney.
So, Mr. Lingle, the concept here is that there's a concern about storage of automobiles, junk piles outside of enclosures in residential areas. And the way you propose to address that is to provide some limitation, presumably, as to automobiles, maybe as to size of junk piles, and to require a permit process for the formal storage, as well as, and maybe as part of the permit process, to provide for some screening or other ways to make it more palatable for that storage. Is that the essence of it?
Commissioner Cooney and members of the commission, essentially that's correct, yes. The amount of exterior storage wouldn't necessarily require a permit, but would be required to comply with the development standards in order to be allowed. So essentially surrounding it by a 6-foot fence, which in and of itself does not require a permit either. So you could have your exterior storage, you could surround it by a fence, you would comply with what's being proposed, but there would be no permit required in order to do that. And then we're also proposing that the amount of storage or the area devoted to storage would be sort of a sliding scale based on the property size, so that more densely urbanized lots would be allowed a smaller area, whereas more rural residential ranchette lots, et cetera, that are larger in size would be allowed to have a larger area devoted to exterior storage.
How about with respect to automobiles? Do you have numbers based on size? Does it increase?
We don't, Commissioner Cooney, members of the commission, we don't have firm numbers yet on that particular aspect. I have been doing a lot of surveying of other jurisdictions to see how they control this issue. It's interesting that a lot of jurisdictions do provide these regulations already, and so I'm trying to build off of those and fit them in the Santa Barbara County model as much as possible.
Thank you.
Is it, before I go to you, Commissioner Blau, is it about automobiles that can be stored and/or parked, or both? What's the issue?
Madam Chair and members of the commission, it's controlling automobile parking on property. So it includes those that are just kept there as somebody's personal hobby or collection, as well as those that are actively used.
Is there something now about automobiles must be in working condition? I mean, you can't store a junker on your property. Is this what this is going to pertain to, or is it something different?
Madam Chair, there are other sections of the county code that address storage of inoperable vehicles.
Okay, so this is about operable vehicles.
Operable and inoperable vehicles, as far as...
It's about both.
Well, we would control... Basically, we're just looking at the storage of automobiles, period.
You
Yeah.
mean storage is different than parking?
Well-
Ms. Black.
Madam Chair.
In my mind.
First of all, I have two suggestions. One is, at the conclusion of this item, which I think most of the people are
Right.
in the audience to speak to, you may want to take public comment
Okay,
before we
I'll-
move on to the
Okay,
rest.
good.
With respect to what we're trying to address with these amendments, we're trying to address people keeping cars on their property out in public view. We don't care if they operate. We don't care if they don't, because the fact of the matter is we've had trouble with people who have had many operating cars on their property and stored on their property
Okay.
in residential areas.
All right, okay, thank you. Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, my only question would be I have great difficulty when we change the rules, and one of the things that we then force someone to do is come and pay us a fee to process a minor CUP when they may have been using this for the past, year, 2 year, 20 years. In most communities, when you see a change, either in zoning, you're allowed for non-conforming, pre-existing, you get approval. So I'm just concerned that we might create a situation where we force someone to come and pay us a very large fee to go through a minor CUP, and I'm wondering if that grace period should include a waiver of any fees if they're required to do a minor CUP in that 6-month period.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Blau, I think that's a policy choice for the Board of Supervisors to make as to whether they want to require a fee or not.
But one we need to consider and make a recommendation on,
Sure.
because I certainly would want to make a recommendation that if we're going to require someone to come in and certify an existing use, that we not charge them an exorbitant fee to do that. That should be, now, past 6 months, I would agree that if they don't get it done in that period of time, it might be appropriate to pay the fee. But
Well-
you'll need to bring that back to us for our consideration when we get to the meat of the issues.
And Mr. Chair, just to be really clear, Madam Chair and Commissioner Blau, to be very clear, I don't think we're saying a conditional use permit will be approved in every case. I mean, that's the purpose of having a conditional use permit.
I understand that, and that even makes the situation worse for me, is we make them pay a fee and then deny it. So, I mean, if we're going to make a determination in the first 6 months, they ought to be able to get that determination without additional costs, so.
Understood.
Okay, before we leave this, my question has to do with the storage of materials and just exactly what has been the experience, I guess, either through, in other words, what has prompted this? Is it people, I mean, I see guys who are in the construction business are storing all kinds of their construction stuff on site. Is that sort of what you're trying to get at, or is it junk piles?
Madam Chair and members of the commission, there's been a number of situations occurring both in North and South counties that have prompted a lot of citizen inquiries as to how we can better regulate these types of activities so that the exterior storage, and be it for somebody that has a business that they're keeping their own vehicles and materials on their property, or if it's just somebody's personal endeavor that they want to keep certain things for whatever reason. I mean, I can point to myself and probably show you some pictures of things that you wouldn't like to be living next to, but you know, they are screened at least from my neighbor's view. So there's a whole variety of different situations that occur. And again, we've had complaints by citizens, and so we are trying to address those.
Does it have anything to do with home occupations? Is that sort of being wrapped into it?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, no, we're not delving into the home occupation standards at this time.
But if it's related to their home occupation where they're storing material, would that not affect
Madam
that in
Chair,
some way?
that would currently, if that's what they're doing, then that would actually be currently in violation of the home occupation standards.
All right, okay, thank you. Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Brown. I live in an unincorporated community, and we have noticed since zoning enforcement was stepped up a bit last year, I think some additional funds were given to zoning enforcement. We've had to, our little community organization, you know, we've begun to educate the community about the existing regulations. And I'm wondering, is this why we're going, you know, we're looking at making some of these changes? Because I would say our community, regarding this very issue, you know, with automobile storage and not going into any of the others, I'd say if the ordinances are enforced, you know, they're satisfied with it. You know, the issue is the enforcement and in the past. So I'm just wondering if this action that we're taking right now is a result of, you know, more enforcement of what exists.
Madam Chair, and Commissioner Brooks, I think the reason we're bringing this forward to you is because we see a hole in our ability to enforce. So there are situations, and I'm sure you'll hear about at least one today, where if someone stores or keeps or parks, however you want to characterize it, 20 cars on their property, and they all run, we have no ability to require that those cars be taken off the property. And in urban residential areas, many don't believe that that's a realistic expectation of a residential property. So the purpose of this ordinance amendment concept is to address that situation where we simply don't have the tools to enforce. We have tools that we can use to enforce the storage of junk, and that includes non-operable cars, but we don't have tools to enforce the storage or parking of what many believe is an excessive number of cars on a piece of property.
Commissioner Blau.
And if I understand what we're doing this morning, you're basically telling us an outline of what you're going to bring to us in the future, and we'll be able to delve into all the details and the numbers and all the rules. You're just giving us a briefing of what you're bringing into us in the
Right.
future. So we don't make any decisions today as to
No.
what's right or wrong.
No.
You're just telling us what you're going to be doing
Right.
next month or in the next few months. Okay,
Mad-
great.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Blau, and your comments that help us draft those proposed ordinances in a way that the commission might feel is appropriate is great, but we don't expect you to give us so much information
What you're looking for today is in case you're missing anything that we
Right.
want you to bring forward in addition to what you're listing, you'd want to know that now.
Or issues such as the one you raised about this one, where you want us to consider the fee issue, or,
Right.
you know, things that
Right.
you'd like us to look into.
Perfect.
Okay. Commissioner Cooney.
Just a point of clarification, even in broad concept, of course, this is all new to us as commissioners. I don't think anybody here was prepared for this issue. It's interesting, but I wonder, does it really address the heart of the problem, which is people acquiring and keeping vehicles that either they collect them or they decline for all kinds of reasons to dispose of them? Nothing in your proposed ordinance would address keeping them on public streets, would they? In other words, in a neighborhood, if I want to take my last 3 cars that I still have but don't drive and park them out on the street, move them around enough so the sheriff doesn't have a problem with it, your ordinance isn't going to prevent me from doing that.
Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission, that's correct. The zoning does not address land use controls on public streets. There are other sections of the county code, however, that do require that if you are going to park a vehicle on a public street, that you have to move it every 5 days or it's subject to being towed by the county.
So then the burden moves from an unsightly storage of vehicles on someone's property to an increased number of vehicles on the street that may impact a neighborhood where there's already shortage of parking. Anyway. Okay. All right. Any other questions? If none, I'll go to public comment, and we'll start again with Mr. Bailey, please. And if there's anybody in the audience who would like to speak to this one particular issue, please get your speaker slip. I have Mr. Rietz's. Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Bailey.
Commissioners, thank you so much. My name is Michael Bailey. I live at 1116 Palomino Road. I do have some photographs for the commissioners to see. Should I distribute it now? Or
Maybe you can give them to Mr. Lengel, and he can put them on the projector here. No? No,
These
okay.
photographs are pictures of a property that lie below me here, and you can see that there is a fence material around, it's a 6-foot fence that goes around the property, and it does nothing to restrict the view from the neighbors. This is the bottom of a canyon here. Palomino Road is zoned as E1, and this is a zone, as you know, intended to protect the residential characteristics of an area, and according to the ordinances, promote a suitable environment for family life at densities which are consistent with promoting sound standards of public health, safety, and welfare.
Oh, yeah.
And I appreciate that individuals have the right to collect items and hobbies and use their property as they so wish. But when a property owner has excessive items on their property, and it begins to jeopardize the health, safety, and welfare, it really becomes inconsistent with promoting a suitable environment for family life. Having 22 cars on a property, and I counted the number of cars this morning, and there's 22 on the property. These pictures were taken approximately a week ago. And these are all filled with gasoline. There's welding equipment on the property, car parts. This really becomes a fire and safety issue. During the Hasacita fire, I spoke, or after the Hasacita fire, I spoke to a fire captain who happened to defend my house, and he reported that the property below this, where all these vehicles are, he reported that it was like a war zone where bombs going off. There were 15 explosions, and none of the firefighters would go near that property because of this explosion. It's hard to prove that this contributed to the loss of housing or property during, in neighbors, but the reality is this was a danger zone, and I think you can get a lot of fire captains who were there at the Hasacita fire testifying to such. The county restricts the number of horses, roosters, noise, and other excesses which interfere with these values or neighborhood values. Having 22 cars in addition to engine blocks, bumpers, fenders, automobile parts, machinery, and tool repair. This is inconsistent with the intent of single-family residential zoning, as more consistent with an industrial zone. And that's where this belongs, as an industrial zone, not in residential housing. If property owner wishes to maintain those cars and have a hobby, that's perfectly okay. Let them do it in an industrial zone, not in a zone that's, or an area that's zoned for residential characteristics of a neighborhood. There's a loophole in the county ordinance, and I'd like to see it addressed. It seems to be being addressed. I haven't seen the specifics of it, but I think the county needs the teeth to be able to enforce and limit the number of vehicles and materials that are stored in neighborhoods and residential zones. Thank you, and I encourage the Planning Commission to adopt this ordinance, and we'll be speaking a little more specifically on it as we see the actual specifics of the ordinance. Thank you.
Great, thank you for coming today. Mr. Reitz, please.
Good morning. My name is Randy Reitz. I'm speaking for the Mission Canyon Association. I want to particularly thank Ms. Black and Mr. Langle for their comments today. We've been working on this problem for over 20 years, and finally, it seems that somebody truly understands the nature of the problem and is going to take some action to address it. It's not just the Palomino-owned property, but there are other properties around Mission Canyon and certainly elsewhere in the county where the accumulation of vehicles, whether they're operable or inoperable, has a detrimental impact on the neighborhood as a whole. The Mission Canyon Planning Advisory Committee adopted a community plan that designated Mission Canyon Road as a scenic corridor. And right there in our scenic corridor, there is a house that has a dozen cars that have been moved in a year. So I think with some help from Mr. Langle and Ms. Black, we're going to address that problem and hopefully solve it. Mission Canyon Association wants to thank the Planning Commission for this work. It's important. It's important to all of its residents and homeowners in Mission Canyon. And we look forward to watching you work on this problem, and hopefully we can be involved. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for coming. Is there anybody else in the audience who would like to speak? No? Okay, seeing none, I'm not going to close the public hearing because we have some other items to go through. So, Mr. Langle, back to you.
All right, Madam Chair, if we're ready to move on to the next issue area, and that would be in regards to correcting some errors that we made when we were adopting the development code regarding campgrounds and recreational vehicles in certain zones. Basically, what's shown on the screen is that when we were translating the Article 3 language and the development code language, we inadvertently allowed some uses such as hostels within a low-intensity residential use, even though the language of certain zoning districts specifically prohibits them in that as that type of a use. Also, that some of the development standards that were meant only to apply to retreat facilities were, for some reason, included as application to other types of recreational development in the county. And also, there was an inadvertent restriction on the use of our recreational vehicles in zones other than RMZ, the Resource Management Zone, and the Mountainous Toro Zone that did not have that restriction previously. So this is basically just a small cleanup effort to make the development code conform to what the previous Article 3 regulations called for.
Any questions? Commissioners, any public want to comment on this particular item? No? Okay, go ahead.
The next issue is in regards to conditional certificates of compliance. This is an area where we really don't have any adopted regulations that provide a process for these activities. As you probably remember from other situations, a conditional certificate of compliance is required when a piece of property has been illegally divided, not in accord with the state regulations or local regulations in effect at the time. And the conditional certificate of compliance is a method by which that previous illegal creation can be corrected, and such that the lot can be considered to be a legal lot for sale, lease, or finance. The only mention of conditional certificates of compliance in our Chapter 21 subdivision regulations is that it mentions that the zoning administrator is the review authority for such applications, but provides no process like applications, fees, things like that. So this would be an amendment to Chapter 21 to put in specific process requirements for conditional certificates of compliance.
Okay.
Another situation that has come up in projects that have come through your commission is that for many of the larger projects that are process through a development plan or a conditional use permit process, it's become apparent that the normal permit expiration periods and even the allowances for time extensions to those permits don't, in all cases, provide sufficient time for the project to be fully developed. A number of things like churches, for example, that are approved under a CUP, where the whole of the project is approved in the beginning, but the idea is it would be developed in phases, typically as the church is successful in fundraising efforts to build those latter phases. So this would incorporate into the development code a procedure for the review authority to adopt a phasing plan as part of that development plan or conditional use permit, so we could specify up front what the expectations are.
Commissioner Blau?
Yeah, is this the problem where, for example, the typical DP might be for a 5-year period of time, and the church is looking at a 20 or 25-year program? So, but also I can see other DPs and CUPs that, where 5 years is not adequate. So we're going to address more than just the phasing issue. We may be able to extend CUPs and DPs for longer than the typical 5 years.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Blau, essentially the time frames for CUP is that what's in the ordinance now is that you're supposed to commence the project within typically 18 months of approval of the CUP, and that development plans have a 5-year lifespan, which the same thing, the commencement is supposed to occur. However, the language is not really clear as to if the development takes longer than that period of time to complete, what the situation is. And so we're trying to, through this process, provide some guidance to the applicants, the neighbors, and the commissioners alike as to what is foreseen as to what will be the development period of that particular project. So it will address both the, yes, yes to your question, yes, it will address the limits on development plans and CUPs.
Okay. Go ahead.
Indemnification is the next topic. What this will do is provide the regulatory basis for the county to require that applicants indemnify the county should a project's approval later be challenged in court. It will, as proposed, it will essentially require that a defense and indemnification agreement be submitted with the application for the project. Currently, in our standard conditions of approval, we do require that this occur. However, because there's no regulatory basis for this requirement, County Council has requested that we amend our ordinance to provide that basis. Household pets.
Commissioner Blau?
Just a fair amount of warning. That's going to require a lot of thinking on my part before I agree to that, and I can see some problems in trying to do that. Because you're asking them to basically indemnify you maybe before the project is approved and conditions are set. That'd be my concern. I'm just giving you fair warning. I'm probably going to have a lot of discussion about that issue.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Blau, the details of what this agreement will look like has not yet been ironed out, and that's certainly an important part of this package. There are a number of jurisdictions that already require that, and we're going to be building on essentially what those jurisdictions have already.
Like I say, I'm just giving you a fair warning. It's going to be a difficult issue for me.
Commissioner Cooney?
Well, I think Commissioner Blau raises a legitimate matter of concern. It's always off-putting to an applicant to be presented with a legal document up front that if the county is sued as a result of granting a permit to that applicant, that the applicant will step in and defend the county. It's a concept, I think, that, while it may be generally used, and we have incorporated it into conditions, is a little tough to swallow sometimes. So I think what my area of examination of the language when it comes out, and I'm certain county councils as well, will have to do with the process of advising applicants that if your permit is granted, this will be a condition, and this is part of our ordinance now, as opposed to just throwing it in as a condition. And I could see where, in our current system, where we simply make it a condition of approval of the project, there could be some legal question if the applicant is actually forced to come forward with significant defense costs down the line. So I think it's more a shoring up, but we definitely have to pay attention to how it's presented to applicants.
And just to follow up on that, and for me, the other concern would be, I could see a situation where the county clearly was an error and the applicant wasn't, and I'm not sure we can stick the applicant with those costs when it was a county error that should have been caught by the county. But that's just, we'll get to that discussion later on, but I agree with Commissioner Cooney, it's going to be in the meat of the document, I think.
Ms. Van Molen.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I just want to clarify that it is currently a standard condition, and applicants are aware of it before they get to this point, and we do currently enforce that condition. So but this will allow, if we were to have problems in needing to, if we were having problems enforcing the condition at a later point, this will give us a basis, a little bit more strength, and a little bit easier if it's also a violation of our zoning code.
Okay, back to you, Mr. Lingle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In regards to household pets, we've discovered that there are a number of zone districts within the county that allow for residential uses, be they secondary to a commercial use or standalone, themselves, or in the case of, let's say, an industrial zone, you can have a watchman quarters. However, the way the code is structured, you cannot keep a dog or a cat in your house or other type of household pet in compliance with the zoning ordinance. So we're proposing to take a look at those zones and incorporate where appropriate, allowing people to keep household pets as part of their residential use of the property.
So that might include, what's the definition of household pets?
A household pet is, for example, a dog, a cat, fish, hamster, things that are normally found within the dwelling itself that people keep.
Oh, within a dwelling?
Right.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Right.
it's
So,
not, okay.
We're not looking at
Okay.
a pet horse or a pet cow
Okay.
or something
Okay.
like that.
That's fine. All right. Or pig or,
Right.
all right.
One of the processes that we adopted in regards to allowing people to seek modification of the development standards within the different zone districts was for permits that did not otherwise require discretionary review, such as a development plan or conditional use permit, where those standards may be modified as part of that approval. The modification process whereby the applicant submits the application, staff reviews it, and it then goes to the zoning administrator for review and approval. We found in a number of situations that this process can be a little overbearing, and that what's being requested is pretty minor in nature. It doesn't raise any neighborhood concerns, and so we're proposing to put in a waived hearing process for these modifications, whereby, similar to what we've done in the past for other types of permit applications that your commission actually looked at back in 2008, instituting the waived hearing process, whereby the neighbors are provided early notice that this is being applied for, that the department's intent is to waive the hearing unless one of the neighbors actually does request the public hearing, and we will certainly hold a public hearing upon that request. But this is a way of hopefully shortcutting the process for those situations that really don't require that it go through the full public hearing.
When you come back, would you provide us statistics on what the public, how the public has responded currently, how the public responds to this? In other words, have you had a lot of people come to these hearings? Have you had a lot of people been involved? Has it been an issue? Height setbacks? I don't really have any feel for this, whether or not that's of a great concern to the public or not. May not be, but you'd know by, I guess, just looking at zoning administrator hearings to know whether the people showed up at all. Can you have that, do you have that information available without too much, no?
Madam Chair, I think that's going to be a bit difficult to provide. We can certainly provide you with information about the number of modifications that went to the zoning
Maybe that would be
administrator.
helpful.
But just to reiterate what's proposed here, we aren't proposing to remove the public hearing requirement if people want a public hearing.
No.
This is very similar to the process we use for coastal development permits with a hearing where they're required because they're located within the appeals jurisdiction. And when we feel that a coastal development permit isn't going to engender a lot of public interest, we go through this waived hearing process. And if somebody wants to have a hearing, we have a hearing. But otherwise, it provides some relief to the processing requirements.
Right, I understand that. I just wonder if there's, to the public, if there's a difference in perception about how these are presented, or if their
Well-
understanding of what
Sure.
goes on between the two.
And Madam Chair, we can also provide you with some information in the staff report that accompanies this particular amendment to show you the sorts of things you can modify and by how
Right.
much.
That would
because
be
these are
helpful.
not, this is not
No.
variance level material
No,
here.
okay,
These are
that's
really
fine.
pretty minor
Okay,
modifications.
fine, thank you.
This one should be familiar,
Mm-hmm.
as you just considered this within the last couple of months, I believe. But our proposal would be to downshift the jurisdiction to the director for making similar use determinations for existing shopping centers, where the shopping center essentially is built out, and this would just be instituting a new use that isn't presently accounted for within the shopping center zone. We would mail notice to all the surrounding residents and property owners, so they would have an idea of what was being proposed in their little neighborhood shopping center area. But that a public hearing would not be required. However, the action of the director to approve such a determination could be appealed to your planning commission, and that would then go through the public hearing process. Temporary uses.
Hang on, Commissioner Valencia.
I have a question on that. In the shopping centers, usually there's a list of items that are allowed in the shopping center, and it's usually one of the renters or occupants that doesn't realize what all the lists are, that has a complaint about these things, and that's what brings these things up. Is that the case?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Valencia, essentially, yes. I mean, you'll require,
Okay, I just wanted to-
from that hearing regarding the Turnpike Shopping Center, the proposal was to allow for the sale of beauty supplies, and because beauty supplies were not specifically listed in the list of allowable uses within the shopping center zone, this had to come to your commission to,
Okay.
for
Minor.
review and approval, and I think that hearing took about 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of staff
Identifying
time.
that there is the need to provide a simpler process. Actually, in looking at other jurisdictions, our shopping center zone is probably a little out of date. Most
So maybe you need to update the uses.
most
too.
shopping centers, zones in other jurisdictions are really more focused on what are the development standards that make it an attractive
Mhm.
place to shop, and not specific uses
Standards.
that may be allowed within those areas.
Commissioner Blau.
I'll just give you one thought for shopping centers, not dealing with this jurisdiction, but a different one, and then they made an equally dumb early decision, corrected it later on. But in the shopping center, where the center is pretty much contained within itself, and it doesn't affect any adjoining property owners, we should have little concern about the uses within that center. I mean, if the owner of the center puts in the wrong tenant mix, and the parking is all screwed up, and it doesn't affect anybody else, I'm not too concerned about it. That's his decision to make. So I think you need to, when you look at this, understand that we don't want to create a situation where the center can adversely affect an adjoining property owner. But where it doesn't affect the adjoining property owner, we have less concern. It's his property to do with as he pleases. So when you are taking a look at that, if there's some way to incorporate that in there, would make me more comfortable.
Commissioner Cooney.
Commissioner Blau, I know we're not remaking the world in these changes, but just to present another side, imagine that you're a shopping center owner and and you have vacant space, and someone comes to you with a valid permit to operate a medical marijuana dispensary, I can imagine if I was another tenant in your center, even though it didn't affect the outside world and it was perfectly acceptable to the county to issue the permit in the first place, I might object on the grounds that it would impact my business. So I think there are cases where the county should be involved, and we're providing here for an appeal from the action of the director in the event that rare case is presented.
And I would agree that one of the people that need to be noticed in this are the adjacent tenants in there. I think it's not just the property owners, but also the tenants. I would agree with you there. But the issue is, if no tenant in there objects, then I see no reason that the process needs to be, or the rules need to be so strict for that particular center.
Okay, Mr. Lingle, continue.
Temporary uses, the proposed amendment would close a loophole that currently allows an owner of a lot to avoid having to go through the minor conditional use permit process to use his property, essentially a weekly or weekend venue for weddings and things like that, by renting or leasing the entire property to a particular lessee, such that that person that the property is leased to can avail themselves of different exemptions within the temporary use regulations and for the property as they see fit, because it's essentially the owner is not the one holding the wedding at that point. It falls then to the person leasing the property that holds the wedding, and provided that person does not receive any money for that, there's no way to regulate it. So we've had a couple of situations where this has arisen, and we're trying to provide better control of that.
So, Madam Chair, just to be clear, we aren't proposing to regulate the short-term rental of properties. I mean, that's not within the scope of what we're talking about. It's really addressing special events that occur on short-term rentals of properties. And Mr. Lingle characterized it fairly well. I mean, there are some fairly well-known properties throughout the county that are party properties. Mm-hmm. And when you want to have a party, you rent this property for the weekend and you throw a big party, a wedding, a party, whatever, and then you leave. And somebody else rents it the next weekend, and it drives neighbors crazy because it's not really what the ordinance intended, being customarily incidental to the residential use, because you expect the residential use of a property to be, at least 30 days, if not longer. And so you wouldn't expect people to have a party every weekend. Okay. So that's what we're trying to close here. This is the other sort of more substantive enforcement issue that is embedded in this ordinance amendment package.
Okay. Commissioner Brooks?
Yes. Would this be where you could add something about vacation rental by owners? Or we have discussed that, I know, here indirectly. Or would that go someplace like back where you're doing campground rental vehicles, you talk about hostels? So where do the vacation rental by owner, where would that issue fit in? And is that not going to be included here?
That's a Maui issue. That's not.
Madam Chair, if I can just restate what I said, that's not an issue we're proposing to address. It's a much bigger issue than I think we can address in a fairly simple ordinance amendment package. What we're trying to do is we're trying to sort of close a loophole on the most annoying part of short-term vacation rentals within the county. And this issue is not just a South County issue. It's a North County issue. It's a Mid-County issue. It's a South County issue. It exists throughout. And so we're really just trying to address that specific issue and leave the larger people doing shorter-term rentals for another day.
Okay.
And last, proposed ordinance amendment regarding the keeping of trailers on property. Right now, the ordinance only speaks to keeping trailers that are meant for habitable purposes, like a recreational vehicle or a trailer that you tow behind your truck or whatever. But there's a number of situations that I'm sure you all have seen where people like to keep trailers on their property for other purposes, such as hauling their jet skis around their boats or for moving materials, things like that. It's been our practice basically to allow these as being similar to what is allowed for other types of trailers, but we wanted to change to go to specify that these things are allowed to occur on a piece of property. They would be subject to the same screening requirements that a recreational vehicle, for example, are required to meet, as well as they could not be parked within the front or side setback areas.
Is there going to be a size requirement on this?
Yes, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, members of the commission, there are size requirements for the size, bulk, and scale, if you were,
Right.
of the vehicle that currently applies within this type of use.
Commissioner Valencia.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Mr. Langle, as you know, RVs and camping trailers are a problem to a lot of people. When my kids were growing up, I had a camping trailer, but I had it screened. I had it on my property so it couldn't be seen. But the city of Lompoc right now is going through this, is reviewing this, and it's very hard to implement these things. People have big RVs that they park on their property. As a result, their cars are on the street because there isn't any room. They take up all the space. They have a boat, they park it on the garage, and all their cars are on the street, and they infringe upon other people's parking rights. So I hope that the rule is stringent enough yet to protect the neighbors and yet to afford them a reasonable use of their property for these vehicles. But there has to be a limit. A person that has an RV, a trailer, and all types of other vehicles, and then has 3 cars in a 7,000 square foot lot, and this is in the county, it creates quite a problem. So I hope we look at this in great depth so that there is so when the sheriff goes out to complain, when there's a complaint about these things, many times he doesn't have the vehicle to make a change or to request something like that. So we need something strong enough to protect and yet to be able to allow the sheriff to request movement of some of these vehicles. We had some tanker trucks being parked on in the village for 2 or 3 years, and there was never a vehicle to have these removed, and yet we didn't know if they had fluid in them or just gases or what, but they were right next to a large high-density living area, and so I hope you look at these with thinking of protecting the neighbors as well as property rights.
Commissioner Blau?
Yeah, I just have some concern with the last statement in here where it talks about where you can't park trailers or other vehicles on the side yard, on the side setbacks. I mean, for me, that's where they should be parked if they're fenced behind a screen or a gate. So I'm hoping, fair warning, I'm not going to agree that, you're going to have a prohibition of against parking vehicles in a side yard setback. If it's behind the front setback on the side yard setback, I think that's the appropriate place to be. I mean, that's how you get them off the street, get them out of view.
Commissioner Brooks?
Yes, I'm going back to the statements made by the 2 gentlemen that were lived in the Mission Canyon area, and with the pictures that we saw, I'm just looking at the trailer language required to be screened from abutting streets. Is there any kind of language you can put to prevent something, let's say in a area where your topography is steep? You have the ideas of, public view with the street versus, private view. And I know, we look at that issue many times, but it seems that what those people are experiencing, maybe this is, the screening has to be maybe more, I don't know if you can, put things on top of it. And, at what point, when, especially living in these canyon areas, are you infringing on somebody's rights? But I'd like to see some language that could be enforced, instead of just saying abutting streets.
So, Mr. Langle, the issue is if somebody had, other than trying to think some of these, well, if you're going to limit sort of the size, bulk, and scale of these trailers that can be stored, to Commissioner Blau's thought, and Commissioner Valencia's as well, that it seems to me like the driveway should be used to park cars, not vehicles, not these kinds of vehicles. So it would seem like it's doubly, you're going to have to find some place to put these things. Commissioner Blau?
Well, I agree with you, but again, here's the issue. If you're not allowed to park them in the
Right.
front yard setback, your driveway is part of your front yard setback. So that would prohibit you from parking the trailer or the large, whatever, in the area. And I agree with that. I mean, I have that problem where I live. It's driving my wife crazy. The guy's got a fifth wheel that's a 35-footer, and it's
Right.
sitting in the front yard setback. Okay, 2 feet of it's on the driveway, the rest of it's on the grass, but, you know, it looks ugly, it's awful. And I also bring up one other point, and I'm not sure we can do this in this particular ordinance, but maybe we can. I'd like you to look at it. I also have another neighbor that's got a, 40-foot box trailer, and, yeah, he's moving it across from my house one day, 3 days later it's across the neighbor's house, 2 days later it's across from my, and of course, the rental police, the older guys that come out and put the chalk on the tires, they put it, come back 3 days later, it's been moved. And it seems to me there's another way to look at this. One of the things I've seen in some areas is the maximum vehicle length that you can park on the street in residential areas is 22 feet. And you can't have commercial plates parked in certain residential areas. So if you could take a look at that, it may also help solve the problem.
Does the county have something like that?
Well,
covered?
I'm not sure. I mean, I know if we can do it within the zoning ordinance. Look at it. I mean, I'm seeing it done in other
Right.
communities where they've gotten, where this
Right.
particular zone, you're not allowed to park more than a 22-foot
Right.
on that particular street.
Right.
So just look at, see if it can be done. It would help
Right.
to solve a lot of problems.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Lingle or Ms. Black?
Madam Chair, I think that was the last
Okay.
topic we intended to discuss with the commission. So
Okay.
unless you have further comments or questions.
Well, I have something. This is something I've talked to Mr. Langle about. I don't know whether this is easy, it can be done. Overall sign plans, final approval or changes, I believe that comes to the Planning Commission. I'm not sure why the BAR can't simply do that. Why it has to, that's an artifact of many years ago, and Mr. Lingle, is there something that we could add so that that's changed, so that it's, because the BAR is the one who looks at these overall sign plans anyway, and I'm not sure what function the Planning Commission has in reviewing these. So I'm wondering if that cannot be incorporated as well.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, in 2008, we actually did bring an amendment to you regarding overall sign plans
did we
that
do that?
required that the overall sign plan be approved at the same time
Okay,
that
as-
the shopping center,
Right.
for example, is approved. So the two are approved in concert with each other. And I don't recall exactly how changes to that overall sign plan would be processed, but we can certainly look at that.
There's something coming to us, is there not? Did I see not something about an overall sign plan in a shopping center at some, that's what prompted that question. Maybe it's gone away, but it must have.
Madam Chair, there is actually an item on your agenda next week.
Right.
With the Hollister-Yacono Development Plan, but that is in conjunction with the development plan and conditional use permit, so
A
it's
sign
coming,
plan.
it's coming, the
Why
overall
would-
sign plan is coming as part of that.
Why do we see all sign plans? The BAR is the one who approves them. Commissioner Blau?
I'd like to see that be an applicant's choice. As a developer, I can get frustrated both ways. If I have to, in some municipalities, I have to bring the signs as a separate permit process. Some we have to do it as part of the development approval process. It really should be the developer's choice, and I'll tell you why. There are certain kind of projects where I have no clue what the sign's going to look like until after I build it, because I don't know who the tenants are, we're doing it on spec, whatever. Other cases where I know exactly who the tenant's going to be and exactly what it's going to look like, and I hate going through the dual process. So I'd like to see it where, you can get your sign approval one of two ways. If you do it with the development agreement process, great. Or you can come back and do it separately through the BAR or whatever mechanism.
Well, a sign plan sets parameters, and they shouldn't need to come through.
Sometimes, I mean, it's, you've got some tenants that it's got to be the sign that's backlit lettering on the
No,
building.
but the
You've got-
overall sign plan would set that at the
You've
outset.
got other ones that want a monument sign, they don't want it on the building.
Well, then that has to go back.
My
Anyway.
point is, if you'll just give us a choice, where they can do it either way, then it just makes it easier to get the approval process.
Ms. Black, I didn't mean to open the can.
We'll look
of
at
worms.
it.
Okay, thank you.
And, Madam Chair, you may want to ask if there's anybody else in the audience
Yeah,
that would
I'm
like
going
to
to,
speak.
I'm going to do that. I just wanted to bring that up. So, is there anybody else who'd like to make public comment on any of the things that we reviewed today? Seeing no one rise, then I'm going to close the public comment period and bring it back to the commission for any further questions or comments. I don't think you're looking for us for anything other. I think you've gotten those comments. Any other? Commissioner Cooney.
It just seems ironic that this package of materials comes to us as if you didn't have enough to do, so you're circling back and doing ordinances when we have the entire land use and development code one way or the other that's going to require a huge amount of work. So, Mr. Engel, I think you're going to have to double your staff.
Commissioner Cooney, I appreciate that. Ms. Black believes that idle hands are the devil's playgrounds, and she likes to keep me busy.
This is the Noel Langell Full Employment Act. Okay. All right. Well, with that, then we'll close this item and thank staff. And we're going to take a little 5-minute break and set up for Mr. Mattson. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The County Planning Commission will receive a briefing on current housing and community development department programs.
Great. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Mr. Mattson. Our Commissioner Brooks, at one of our hearings, asked to get a briefing on Empower, and I think he's going to do that for us today and may have some other information as well. So welcome, Mr. Mattson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. It's good to see you all again, and I understand you have your holiday lunch today, which was always a pleasant tradition when I had the pleasure of working in planning and development. I am here to provide a quick briefing, in particular to address Empower SBC, which is one of the county's innovative economic development programs. But first, I wanted to briefly touch upon the larger work that the department is doing right now with the release on November 15th of our Notice of Funding Availability, which is our annual, one of 2 annual funding processes related to our oversight as a lead agency of urban county federal entitlement dollars. And I bring this to the Commission to highlight 2 specific things. One, you all work with the community in the area of affordable housing developments, as well as serving a key role, an advisory role with the capital improvement program every year. And there's 2 funding sources that I would like to bring to your attention so that you have an opportunity to share that with the community and so that it can be in the back of your minds when the capital improvement plan comes forward this year. So for 2011, we have funding available for 4 specific grant sources, federal HUD grant sources. Those are the Home Partnership Act, about $1.2 million there. For CDBG, Community Development Block Grants, in terms of capital projects funding, about $983,000. For public services funding, which primarily goes to support our homeless services organizations, as well as special needs groups and nonprofits, totaling about 64 organizations that we work with, nonprofits that we contract with every year to provide vital public services, about $245,000 there. And then emergency shelter grant funding, which goes to support our homeless emergency shelters, the 3 that we have in the county, and that's just a little under $85,000. So about $2.5 million, but specifically this capital project line, the Board of Supervisors over the years has weighed the question of whether CDBG capital project money should be used to support county infrastructure projects or community infrastructure projects, recognizing that county infrastructure projects are vital community development activities and serve the entire community. So General Services, in partnership with Housing Community Development over the years, has put forward several different projects such as the elevator upgrade at the Public Health Building, as well as some rehabilitation of women's domestic violence homes are the two most recent ones. But I wanted to call your attention to almost $1 million that's available potentially for capital projects, whether those be in the community or whether those are county-sponsored projects. And then that second item was the home funding, and that home funding is directly related to support for our housing nonprofits. And typically, over the past 5 years, the trend in terms of projects that have come forward are permanent housing with supportive services on-site, wraparound services. And this is congruent with new congressional goals and priorities that are associated with not just housing first, but housing with those vital services. So the nonprofits have focused on coupling their local needs and priorities, talking about those needs with the Board of Supervisors and the city councils, such that we have some quality permanent housing projects with wraparound services. In terms of the funding process, slides animated. In November, on November 15th, the NOFA was released, and we are holding workshops for potential applicants in the community coming up next week on December 8th and 9th. We've already held a couple of pre-application workshops as well. In January, on the 21st of January, applications are due. Those will go through preliminary application, review, and screening for eligibility, fill in any last gaps, prior to scheduling public review committee meetings with our Affordable Housing Loan and Capital Committee, as well as a Public Services Committee that looks at the projects and weighs those for recommendation and selection to the Board of Supervisors. In April, we will hold a round of additional discussions with the community. There will be a 30-day public review period of the 2011 action plan, which is the formal annual application to HUD for the projects. HUD has to approve all of the projects that are put forward locally. And then in May, that action plan is submitted to HUD after approval for submission by the lead agency, and in this case, that is the Board of Supervisors, on behalf of the partner cities that are in our urban county and home partnership. The second item I wanted to talk to you about today relates to Empower SBC, which we've been at work almost a year and a half now on Empower, and we've had several milestones, but we've also encountered several hurdles outside of our local control. Empower SBC was originally designed to be what would amount to be the largest economic development program in the county's history. It focused and was designed to drive demand for energy efficiency building upgrades in the areas of energy efficiency, water conservation, installation of renewable technologies, using what was known as a PACE model, or a property assessed clean energy model. Property assessed clean energy started in the Bay Area, quickly spread like a wildfire throughout the United States. Approximately 300 programs were in the design phase and ready to be launched. And ultimately, what Property Assessed Clean Energy allowed for was a homeowner to assess themselves, voluntarily assess themselves, and receive a loan-like amount of money, up to $75,000, that then they could use to make improvements to their home with using eligible energy efficiency technologies. And this would be paid back on the property tax bill on a term up to 20 years. Now, we officially launched our program, Empower SBC, on the 40th anniversary of Earth Day in April of this year. We had applications that were expected to go out the door in August. We had an interest list of well over 600 homeowners and individuals. We knew that the doors and lines would be created simultaneously when we had those applications available. And then we were 2 weeks away when the federal government, particularly the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which is the governmental agency that oversees Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, issued a statement saying that they were not interested in purchasing secondary market bond products and that were related to PACE, and that they were advising all banks who were primary holders of these mortgages to question the validity of government PACE-backed energy efficiency financing. And that effectively stalled PACE in the summer and has effectively put PACE on life support. There's a number of lawsuits as well as a number of legislative bills, the congressional and federal court system, to deal with PACE. But what we ultimately realized is that even if PACE were allowed to go forward, Wall Street and ultimately those that needed to buy the securities to make PACE work weren't interested, and you couldn't change the market. As a result, several jurisdictions still offer PACE, but effectively they're very different programs than was originally envisioned. The PACE policy debate raised an issue of national awareness about how to create and drive market demand for energy efficiency upgrades. Here locally, for example, we have 150,000 single-family homes. 50,000 of those are owner-occupied, and they were built before 1975. They're highly energy inefficient. Yet the capital right now that's being made available to banks, from banks, to those homeowners, is at rates and terms that don't make sense for them to reinvest to upgrade those particular homes. And the private sector, in this particular case, is not offering products in line with the current federal administration's goals to transform our residential and small building stock and commercial stock and industrial stock into energy efficient infrastructure. So the federal government has invested in the case of home energy efficiency upgrades, over $500 million of grant funding made available to state and local governments. So the national awareness was raised. We're looking for ways and ideas to transform what we had as a PACE financing mechanism into a program that can accomplish the same outcomes and produce the same benefits to our community. So local grant funding. We had received a showcase award in the amount of $2.4 million from the federal government, one of 35 jurisdictions in the United States to receive such a showcase award, specifically to help stimulate our PACE program. And that money, along with nearly $1 million from the state of California, California Energy Commission, is not affected by the postponement of PACE. Both the Department of Energy and the Energy Commission at the state level are strongly supportive and are encouraging local jurisdictions like Santa Barbara County to redesign their programs and be able to move forward to put building upgrade money in the pipeline so that homeowners and businesses can take advantage of this unique time and an unprecedented support for energy efficiency at the federal and state level. The challenge has been for us in terms of looking at a redesign is that the community demand for this remains very high. Since the early stages of development, Empower was designed really to address two main barriers for consumers. The first was access to capital. The second was market complexity. And there's no question that the demand still exists, but the financing product is not yet there. So we've had an opportunity to address these barriers by re-envisioning a program that further limits the county's risk. Ultimately, county risk in this area is defined as no longer being the primary underwriter, no longer being the servicer of financing, and to form a partnership, a public-private partnership with our local financial institutions and allow them to do what they do best, but at the same time use government, local government's unique position of being able to subsidize, and I'll be direct about that. The energy efficiency financing and the grants that are available right now are federal subsidies to encourage a grassroots market transformation. In terms of that public-private partnership, we have put together a comprehensive program design that includes the financing products itself in partnership with the banks, a robust marketing and outreach campaign, workforce development campaign to ensure that our construction trades industry, who is experiencing up to 40% shadow unemployment right now. We had our last general contractor in business in Santa Maria go out of business just recently, last large one. And of course, data and evaluation for performance benchmarking and reporting to both the state of California and the federal government as well as be able to have those outcomes to demonstrate to our own community what that leveraged federal grant investment is doing to support economic development in this particular area. So the new financing strategy, as I mentioned, it focuses on public-private partnerships. It's an effort to engage the local lending community by pairing county credit enhancements with private capital. In credit enhancements, in particular, what we're proposing to do is create a loan loss reserve fund to bring down the relative risk of our lending institutions locally to participate and offer capital to consumers. We have done the analysis and know that about $1 million loan loss reserve will generate up to about $20 million in loans, so roughly a 20-to-1 leverage rate. This allows us to stretch our federal grant dollars as far as we possibly can and to stimulate the private sector capital to flow a little bit quicker than it is right now at rates and terms that are below what is currently market available. In terms of rates and terms, we believe our credit enhancement will bring us terms to the community of somewhere between 5.25% and 6% for terms of up to 15 years. Credit enhancements clearly reduce the county risk, as well as the public-private partnerships reduce the county risk, avoiding direct lending and underwriting. We know that we can create a loan product that's more accessible, cheaper, and with better terms. And again, this allows banks to leverage that unique government infusion that's available right now in the marketplace. In terms of the strategies that we have with the comprehensive program design, we know that these can produce similar outcomes to what was originally envisioned with Empower under the PACE program. Creating local jobs, we believe that we'll create about 400 jobs during the 3-year pilot program. Those are vitally needed jobs. We've had well over 1,000 jobs lost in the construction trade industry during the recession, so this could bring back a significant number of those. Certainly will stimulate the local economy in terms of total economic output. A 3-year pilot is expected to bring in about $60 million into the local economy, primarily in the construction trades, finance, and real estate industry. Clearly puts money back in the pocketbooks of participants by reducing their monthly energy bills, by building the equity in their homes, and producing at the same time not only a financial savings, but a quality of life improvement with a more comfortable structure and one that can begin to change the character of the communities that those homes are within. Clearly, improving of building stock and quality of life has community-wide benefits as well. Clearly the increased resource efficiency, decreased greenhouse gas emissions, as well as a reliance on traditional energy sources, giving a nod to both clean power and renewable technologies, as well as the water conservation measures that are included in this. Looking ahead, the board is expected to receive a revised program implementation plan at the end of this week. They will be discussing this item on their December 14th calendar. We're proposing to begin the request for proposal process with our financial institutions to identify and select a primary program partner who will offer the capital to the consumers and be eligible to utilize our loan loss reserve fund. The goal with board support is then to launch a comprehensive 3-year pilot program using 100% federal and state grant sources. This is general fund, designed to be a general fund neutral program. On the 14th of December, I'll be proposing a budget revision to return $5 million of general fund money to the general fund treasury because we have a fully intention to make this public-private partnership work and have it exist and be sustainable solely using federal grant sources. After the 3-year pilot program, if we have not identified program revenue that is stable and we haven't accomplished the outcomes that we have reported both to the federal government and to our local community, we would consider program termination and shutting it down. Again, this began as ARA money from the federal stimulus package, and it was designed as a one-shot infusion. We're trying to leverage that, stretch it as far as we can, and create a truly grassroots community and economic development program. If we're not able to do that, we're not able to identify it, or if the private sector and the community groups that have been so supportive are able to do this on their own, there is no role at that point for government. The market transformation at that point would have occurred, and we would have accomplished the goals that we set out to do. So with that, we have had strong support from the real estate industry, strong support from both the Santa Barbara Contractors Association and Santa Maria Contractors Association, as well as the host of environmental and community groups who have supported this and recognized what we're trying to do at a local level to implement some of the federal policy and make use of that unique opportunity and federal funding source. So I'm happy to answer questions that you have, and I would love to come back and see you early next year and talk about some of the other things that we're doing at the department.
Okay, please do, and we have some questions here. Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Mattson, welcome. In whatever capacity you choose to come, we enjoy your visits and very informative. A question about the RFP process. Were you looking for a single primary partner, lender partner? So it'd be some local banking institution that would, through standardized applications, be processing these various loans during the pilot program?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Cooney, at this point we're flexible. We want to see the term sheets that are brought forward in responding to RFP. Whether or not we select one financial partner, a number of financial partners, depends on the qualitative nature and of what they bring forward. So we're open to forging these partnerships, and we know that there's a number of large national banks that are participating on a national scale, but we do want to give preference to our local lending institutions. These do not have to necessarily take the form of banks. They can be venture capital investors that work with a bank to offer up capital or augment our loan loss reserve fund. They could also be general capital partners, for example, a partner like GE Capital, who could offer capital directly to vendors, directly to the contractors to be able to offer their services. What we're looking for is unique public-private partnerships. Now, traditionally, that is going to be a bank, but the RFP is designed to be flexible.
Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, so as I understand it now, the idea that this would be paid back on the property tax bill is a gone, no longer done. That's good to hear, because I could have told that wasn't going to work a year ago. What you're basically doing is putting a new loan on the property that's now in a prior position as the current first trustee holder, so I can understand why Freddie and Fannie didn't want that to happen. Just a comment, if you're offering the program at, you think, 6 or 6.5%, and it's going to be some kind of a second trustee, good luck. It's not going to work. I've got to tell you that right now, I don't think.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Blau, you raise a very good point, and the mortgage-backed securities market, as you're alluding to, is a dead market right now. You can't move mortgage-backed securities, and if it's a second position, there's absolutely no interest. Banks are holding that right now, and often it's worthless. That will change. The pendulum swings back and forth, and the Fed's safeness and soundness principles will govern the point in which time that market will come back. What we are seeing right now is a tremendous amount of lending capacity in the financial institutions for unsecured product, for credit cards, for auto loans, and this is where the federal financial advisors that are advising HUD, advising the Department of Energy, advising Vice President Biden's Commission on Energy Efficiency Financing are looking. And the banks are willing to lend unsecured financing capital at rates that are previously unheard of, because there's an appetite for it and there's a perceived minimal risk of unsecured product because of the size of each loan that's made and the relative risk aversion of what that loan is being made for, recognizing that there's a strong federal, local, and state underwriting process that is coupled with the banks, and that provides a very strong guarantee. But your point is well taken, and we certainly are not intending to explore second position paper, because that produces the same issues and the same lack of an appetite in Wall Street that pays financing.
Yeah, you're much better off unsecured private debt. Absolutely, I would agree with that. The other thing I was curious to know is, did you consider using the money, and can you use the money to fund the county-owned properties that are energy efficient? I mean, this building is an awfully good example. This was built, I don't know how many years ago, but we know it's not very energy efficient. I can show you the buildings on Foster Road, where you have your current planning department. Not only is it not energy efficient, it's not ADA compliant, it's nothing about that that's proper. I wonder if those funds could be used to, that would save the county a tremendous amount of money.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Blau, yes. The answer for this is it's specifically for energy efficiency that is community-focused. There are a number of federal sources at the Department of Energy, as well as some of the other agencies, to do building upgrades for the government sector in particular. The way that our grant application, our competitive grant application, was written and funded, it was specifically to support community-wide energy efficiency projects. We continue to work with both planning and development, general services, as well as a host of other actors throughout the county to look for sources of money that we can use to finance energy efficiency upgrades.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Mattson, with regard to the prototypical loan that would be made by the investor, first of all, what ranges are you talking? I mean, use me as an example. I want to install solar panels and reduce my dependency on the power grid. So I want to apply for a loan, and basically, despite my best efforts, I am unable to repay the loan, and the interest is. What is the county's position? Does the lender turn to the county? Is the county a guarantor in that situation? Just walk through the process.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Cooney, I'll walk you through first rates and terms. We don't know what the rates and terms are going to be. That's up for our financial partners to determine and to propose to us, as well as a number of things that related to transaction costs, and we certainly want to help reduce their transaction costs, and recognizing that, we believe that we'll have attractive rates and terms. I can tell you what we've seen in a number of other jurisdictions, several dozen other jurisdictions. And those are terms and ranging from a minimum amount of, say, $2,500 to $3,000, maxing out at around $20,000 for your typical energy efficiency upgrade. But there are other unique loan products that are just coming to market. Last month, the Vice President announced a new HUD program, a Title I HUD program called the Power Saver Program. And this is the first HUD product that is not income restricted. It's available to those with above average credit, 680 and above, that provides up to an additional $25,000. So there are opportunities to leverage multiple sources, and each one of those sources has their own guarantee. So for a local product for an energy efficiency financing, that would primarily be guaranteed through a loan loss reserve, somewhere in the neighborhood of an 80% or a 90% guarantee. It's probably a sliding scale guarantee that pulls back over time, that allows us to reflow our loan loss reserve so that we have more capital that's available to consumers and participants who want to undertake these types of home upgrades. In terms of the rates, again, we're seeing them anywhere from about 5.25% upwards of 7.5%, 8%. But those higher terms or the higher rates are for longer terms and lower FICO scores. So these are using traditional underwriting criteria, your typical Truth in Lending Act type provisions of debt to income, loan to value, et cetera. Fairly stringent underwriting criteria, all governed by the financial partners, in this case not the government, which allows us to operate a much leaner and more effective administrative process because we're simply a portal and a pass-through of that relationship between the consumer and that lender on the back end, and finding them the best product and getting them the best rate and term that's available at that particular point in time.
So just to finish, the county's role at the end of the day when the consumer defaults is not there'd be no county funds involved, but this pool of reserve would be accessed, and so the county would really be a facilitator or administrator more than being
That's
responsible.
exactly correct. And the loan loss reserve itself is not county money, that's federal money. We are restricted to use only up to $1 million of our federal money as a percentage of our total grant for a loan loss reserve. And that's really the goal, is to leverage that money and keep the county risk to a minimum, keep it general fund neutral. So there is no risk to the county. That loan agreement is a loan agreement and a contract between the borrower and that lender, utilizing our loan loss reserve to bring down the risk and lower the transaction costs.
Great.
Thank you. Commissioner Blau?
Yeah, well, if that's true, then I would applaud the program going forward. However, you would need to convince me that the county's maximum risk in the deal is the $1 million of federal funds. If you're setting up a $20 million loan fund with a $1 million guarantee, my question would be, okay, so the defaults are such that whatever you're guaranteeing the lenders, and I'm sure it's 20% or 80% of the loan is how you're going to work this, what happens if the loan loss is $1.5 million or $2 million? Is the county now stuck there $500,000 because they're the guarantor? I don't think you know the answer to that question yet because you don't have the deal done. But I think what's important for you to understand is we don't want the county risking more than $1 million of the federal money that they were given. So whatever program you do, make sure that the losses can't be greater than that.
Again, a comment right on point that we have also, we're working directly with our Federal Department of Energy technical assistants and attorneys to guarantee that the contractual relationships with the banks, again, provide for flexibility and provide for protection of the county.
Okay. Well, seeing no other questions, I thank you on behalf of the Commission for coming and for your presentation. It was very informative, and probably learned more about this than I ever knew about it before, but that was the purpose of it. So thank you.
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
Thank you. And the Commission has one last item of business, and that is to approve our minutes of November 10th. Ms. Black has assured me that the decibel level we set was at 50, not 45. I guess Mr. Lingle, did he review the, okay. He reviewed the hearing. So, Ms. Van Mullen, did you have something?
Madam Chair, I think we're going to suggest that we break apart the minutes so that Commissioner Cooney can vote on the bulk of the minutes.
Oh, okay,
and
fine. Okay, then I'll separate out. All those.
A4, I think, or.
Yeah, so I'll separate
C4,
out
excuse me.
item C4. Okay. So, all those in favor of approval of the minutes less item C4, and I think Commissioner Cooney had some minor grammar changes he was going to get with Mr. Villalobos. That's the motion. I just need a second on that. Okay. And all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Motion carries. And then I'll make a motion to approve the November 10th minutes, item C4.
I'll second that.
Okay. And all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And
Abstain.
okay, great. Thank you. Well, that concludes the Commission's business for the day, and thank you. We look forward to seeing you then on November 8th in Santa Maria. Ms. Black.
Madam Chair, just two things. December 8th.
December 8th.
And we will be convening to the Planning Commission lunch at
Right,
Opal.
great. All right, thank you.
That way.
Down the street. Follow the herd. Okay. All right. Thank you.